NEC 322. D addresses wiring in air handling areas beneath raised floors specifically for information technology equipment. It stipulates that such wiring must be installed in accordance with Article 645. Article 645 of the National Electrical Code deals with information technology equipment rooms, covering various aspects of electrical installations within these spaces. One key aspect of Article 645 is the requirement for a disconnecting means. This disconnecting means must be capable of disconnecting power to all electronic equipment located within the information technology equipment room. The purpose of this requirement is to provide a readily accessible and reliable method for quickly de-energizing all electronic equipment in the event of an emergency, such as a fire or electrical fault. This enhances safety for personnel and minimizes potential damage to equipment. However, the scope of Article 645 and its disconnecting means requirement is specifically limited to the information technology equipment room itself. It does not automatically extend to all wiring located under raised floors, even if those raised floors are used as air handling spaces. NEC 322. D, on the other hand, addresses the specific situation of wiring under raised floors in air handling areas when that wiring is associated with information technology equipment. It mandates that this wiring be installed in accordance with Article 645. This does not mean that the disconnecting means requirement of Article 645 automatically applies to the underfloor wiring. It means that the wiring methods, overcurrent protection, grounding, and other relevant requirements of Article 645 must be followed for the underfloor wiring. In summary, NEC 322. D requires that the wiring under raised floors in air handling areas for information technology equipment must comply with the installation requirements outlined in Article 645. This includes using appropriate wiring methods, ensuring proper overcurrent protection, and adhering to grounding and bonding guidelines. The disconnecting means requirement of Article 645 is generally applicable within the information technology equipment room itself, but it is not automatically extended to the underfloor wiring solely because that wiring is located in an air handling space. If the underfloor wiring is entirely enclosed in conduit, such as EMT or LFMT, this provides a significant level of protection. Conduit serves as a physical barrier, protecting the conductors from damage and reducing the risk of electrical faults. However, the use of conduit alone does not automatically exempt the installation from all the requirements of Article 645. The specific requirements that apply will depend on the overall configuration of the installation and the interpretation of the relevant code sections by the authority having jurisdiction. In the situation you described, where the underfloor wiring is entirely in conduit and the primary goal is to avoid having a disconnecting means for the underfloor wiring, it is important to carefully consider the scope and intent of both NEC 322 D and Article 645. The key is to recognize that NEC 322 D requires compliance with Article 645 for the underfloor wiring installation, but this does not automatically trigger the disconnecting means requirement for the underfloor wiring itself. The disconnecting means requirement primarily applies to the equipment within the information technology equipment room. Therefore, if the underfloor wiring is solely providing power or signal to equipment located in the information technology equipment room, and the disconnecting means is already provided for that equipment within the room as required by Article 645, then a separate disconnecting means for the underfloor wiring may not be required. However, it is essential to consult with the local authority having jurisdiction to obtain a definitive interpretation of the code requirements for your specific installation. The authority having jurisdiction has the final say in how the code is applied and can provide guidance on whether a disconnecting means is required for the underfloor wiring, taking into account the specific details of the installation and the intended use of the space. To further clarify, let's delve into the specifics of NEC 322 D and Article 645 to fully understand the requirements and how they relate to your situation. NEC 322 D, titled Wiring in Environmental Air Spaces, addresses the installation of wiring in spaces used for environmental air, such as the underfloor areas you described. It specifically states that wiring in these spaces beneath raised floors for information technology equipment must be permitted in accordance with Article 645. This means that the wiring methods, cable types, and installation practices used in these underfloor spaces must adhere to the requirements outlined in Article 645. Article 645, titled Information Technology Equipment, provides detailed requirements for electrical installations in information technology equipment rooms. It covers a wide range of topics, including wiring methods, grounding, overcurrent protection, and disconnecting means. Section 645. 10 of Article 645 specifically addresses the disconnecting means requirement. It mandates that a disconnecting means be provided to disconnect power to all electronic equipment in the information technology equipment room. This disconnecting means must be readily accessible and clearly identified. However, it's crucial to understand that the scope of Article 645 is primarily focused on the information technology equipment room itself. It does not automatically extend to all wiring located outside of the room, even if that wiring is associated with the equipment within the room. This is where the interpretation of NEC 322 D becomes important. While NEC 322 D requires that wiring in underfloor air handling spaces comply with Article 645. It does not explicitly state that the disconnecting means requirement of Article 645 must be applied to the underfloor wiring itself. Instead, it focuses on ensuring that the wiring methods and installation practices used in the underfloor space meet the standards outlined in Article 645. Therefore, if the underfloor wiring is installed in accordance with the wiring method requirements of Article 645, such as being enclosed in conduit EMT or LFMT, and a disconnecting means is already provided for the equipment within the information technology equipment room, then a separate disconnecting means for the underfloor wiring may not be required. To illustrate this point further, consider the following scenarios. Firstly, if the underfloor wiring is solely supplying power to equipment located within the information technology equipment room, and that the equipment has a disconnecting means readily accessible within the room, then a separate disconnecting means for the underfloor wiring may be redundant. Secondly, if the underfloor wiring is providing signal or data connections to equipment within the information technology equipment room, and those connections do not carry significant electrical power, then a disconnecting means may not be necessary. Thirdly, if the underfloor wiring is serving multiple pieces of equipment both inside and outside the information technology equipment room, then the need for a disconnecting means for the underfloor wiring would depend on the specific configuration and the requirements of the equipment being served. In your situation, where all the underfloor wiring is in conduit EMT or LFMT, this provides a significant level of protection. Conduit serves as a physical barrier, protecting the conductors from damage and reducing the risk of electrical faults. This can be a factor in determining whether a disconnecting means is required for the underfloor wiring. However, the use of conduit alone does not automatically exempt the installation from all the requirements of Article 645. It is essential to carefully consider the specific details of the installation and consult with the local authority having jurisdiction to obtain a definitive interpretation of the code requirements. The authority having jurisdiction will consider factors such as the type of equipment being served by the underfloor wiring, the presence of other disconnecting means, and the overall safety of the installation. They may also take into account any local amendments or interpretations of the National Electrical Code. In summary, NEC 322 D requires that wiring in underfloor air handling spaces for information technology equipment comply with Article 645. Article 645 requires a disconnecting means for equipment within the information technology equipment room. However, the disconnecting means requirement of Article 645 does not automatically extend to the underfloor wiring itself. If the underfloor wiring is installed in accordance with the wiring method requirements of Article 645, such as being enclosed in conduit, and a disconnecting means is already provided for the equipment within the information technology equipment room, then a separate disconnecting means for the underfloor wiring may not be required. It is always recommended to consult with the local authority having jurisdiction to obtain a definitive interpretation of the code requirements for your specific installation. Let's delve a bit deeper into the specific requirements within Article 645 that might be relevant to your situation, even if the disconnecting means requirement itself isn't directly applicable to the underfloor wiring. Firstly, wiring methods. Article 645 specifies acceptable wiring methods for information technology equipment rooms. Common wiring methods include the use of listed information technology equipment cable, metal raceways such as EMT, and flexible metal conduit FMC. Since you are already using EMT or LFMT, you are likely meeting this requirement. Secondly, grounding and bonding. Article 645 emphasizes the importance of proper grounding and bonding to minimize electrical noise and ensure personnel safety. This includes grounding the metal enclosures of equipment and raceways. Make sure your conduit system is properly grounded and bonded according to NEC 250. Thirdly, overcurrent protection. Article 645 requires that overcurrent protection devices, circuit breakers, or fuses be readily accessible and properly sized to protect the wiring and equipment. Ensure that the overcurrent protection for the circuits feeding the underfloor wiring is adequate. Fourthly, cable markings. Article 645 may require that cables used in information technology equipment rooms be marked with specific information such as their voltage rating and temperature rating. Verify that the cables you're using meet these marking requirements. Fifthly, abandoned cables. Article 645 addresses the issue of abandoned cables, which are cables that are no longer in use but remain in place. The code may require that abandoned cables be removed to prevent them from becoming a fire hazard or contributing to electrical noise. Finally, fire stopping. Article 645 may require fire stopping to be installed where cables or raceways penetrate fire-rated walls or floors. This helps to prevent the spread of fire and smoke. Even if a disconnecting means is not required for the underfloor wiring, adhering to these other requirements of Article 645 can help to ensure a safe and reliable electrical installation. Remember that the interpretation of the NEC can vary depending on the local authority having jurisdiction. It is always best to consult with them to get the specific guidance on how the code applies to your situation. They can provide valuable insights and help you to ensure that your installation meets all applicable requirements. Let's also briefly touch on the potential consequences of not complying with the NEC. Failure to comply with the NEC can have several negative consequences, including firstly, safety hazards. Non-compliant electrical installations can create safety hazards for personnel, such as electric shock and fire. Secondly, property damage. Electrical faults caused by non-compliant installations can lead to property damage. Thirdly, legal liability. If someone is injured or property is damaged as a result of a non-compliant electrical installation, the owner or installer may be held legally liable. Fourthly, insurance issues. Insurance companies may refuse to pay claims for damages caused by non-compliant electrical installations. Fifthly, fines and penalties. The local authority having jurisdiction may impose fines and penalties for non-compliance with the NEC. Sixthly, project delays. If a non-compliant electrical installation is discovered during an inspection, it can lead to project delays while the necessary corrections are made. To avoid these negative consequences, it is essential to ensure that all electrical installations comply with the NEC and any applicable local amendments. This includes using qualified electricians, obtaining necessary permits, and undergoing inspections by the local authority having jurisdiction. In addition to the NEC, there may be other codes and standards that apply to your electrical installation. For example, building codes may address issues such as fire safety and accessibility. It is important to be aware of all applicable codes and standards and to ensure that your installation complies with them. Let's summarize the key points to consider regarding your specific situation. Firstly, NEC 322. D requires that wiring in underfloor air handling spaces for information technology equipment comply with Article 645. Secondly, Article 645 requires a disconnecting means for equipment within the information technology equipment room. Thirdly, the disconnecting means requirement of Article 645 does not automatically extend to the underfloor wiring itself. Fourthly, if the underfloor wiring is installed in accordance with the wiring method requirements of Article 645, such as being enclosed in conduit, and a disconnecting means is already provided for the equipment within the information technology equipment room, then a separate disconnecting means for the underfloor wiring may not be required. Fifthly, it is always recommended to consult with the local authority having jurisdiction to obtain a definitive interpretation of the code requirements for your specific installation. Sixthly, even if a disconnecting means is not required for the underfloor wiring, you should still comply with the other applicable requirements of Article 645, such as those related to wiring methods, grounding, overcurrent protection, and cable markings. Finally, failure to comply with the NEC can have serious consequences, including safety hazards, property damage, legal liability, and fines. By carefully considering these points and consulting with the local authority having jurisdiction, you can ensure that your electrical installation is safe, compliant, and reliable. Remember that electrical codes and standards are constantly evolving. It is important to stay up to date on the latest changes and to consult with qualified professionals to ensure that your electrical installations meet all applicable requirements.